Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The night was dark over the riverlands, and the wind carried the scent of rain and smoke. Beneath the shadow of a half-broken tower, a man rode alone, his cloak torn, his sword dulled from too many fights. His name was Sir Daemon Rivers, a knight of no house, a bastard born of Lord Hoster Tully's blood, but never his name. The storm above seemed to echo the turmoil in his heart. Only a week past, he had worn the trout sigil upon his breast, serving under the banners of River Run. But now the banners were ash, his company scattered, his home village burned by the gold-cloaked lions of Casterly Rock. The Lannisters had come like fire through the fields, and Daemon had been too far to stop them. When he returned, he found the smoldering ruins of the mill where his sister had lived, her body among the fallen. He buried her by the river, beneath the weeping willows, where she used to watch the fish leap at dusk. That night, he swore an oath, not to the Tullys, not to Robb Stark, but to vengeance itself. The war was spreading, Robb Stark, crowned king in the north, Renly and Stannis both laying claim to the Iron Throne, Balon Greyjoy rising in rebellion, and Joffrey seated in King's Landing with his mother's cunning behind him. 5 kings, 5 wars, and none cared for the common folk dying beneath their banners. Daemon saw it clearly. The realm was bleeding, and every lord called the wound honor. He rode for days through blackened fields and abandoned villages. Once, he found a boy of 12 lying by a burnt wagon, his leg crushed. Daemon dismounted, fed him water, and stayed until the boy's breathing stopped. "The gods are cruel," Daemon muttered, and pressed a copper into the boy's hand. "But I'll be crueler yet before I'm done." At night, he dreamt of the river, red as blood. When he reached the Crossroads Inn, what folk called the Clanking Dragon, it was near dawn. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the yard was half filled with soldiers in mismatched armor, river lords, he guessed, or deserters. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and the sour tang of ale. Daemon kept his hood low, but his sword and the way he carried himself drew eyes nonetheless. "Cold road for traveling," said the innkeeper, a short, wary man polishing a cup. "Cold times for all," Daemon replied. He placed a silver stag on the counter. "Bread, meat if you've any left." The man nodded and vanished into the kitchen. Daemon found a corner seat and watched the room. A group of sellswords argued in hushed tones, Dornish by their accents. Near the hearth, 2 men in Frey colors drank quietly, their faces grim. It was the Freys who made his hand tighten on the cup. There were rumors, whispers of some bargain between Lord Walder Frey and the Crown, though no one knew its shape. And now these Freys, sitting easy in Riverland's soil, as if waiting for something. The innkeeper returned with food and a small loaf of dark bread, but before Daemon could ask after news, the door creaked open again. A woman stepped inside, hooded, travel-worn, her hair damp from rain. She moved like one who had ridden far and fast. When her hood slipped, Daemon caught a glimpse of pale eyes and auburn hair, the shade of a northern winter. She went to the counter, spoke a few words, then glanced toward Daemon's corner. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and something in her gaze, wary, fierce, proud, held him still. She took her meal and sat 2 tables away. Later, when most had gone to sleep, Daemon approached her. "You're a long way from home," he said quietly. "So are you. she replied. Her voice was low but steady. You carry a tully blade, though you don't wear the colors. He hesitated. You've a keen eye. I have reason to, she said. My brother rode south with King Rob. He never came back. I mean to find what became of him. What was his name? Branrick Snow, she said. A bastard of Winterfell. Daemon's brow furrowed. There are many Snows in the north. Not like him. Her expression hardened. He carried a message for Robb Stark, something meant for Riverrun. He never reached it. Something cold stirred in Daemon's chest. The phrase, the rumors, and now this northern messenger gone missing. If your brother rode south, it's likely the Lannisters took him. Or worse, she said, there are men in the Riverlands who wear no banners at all. They take coin from both sides. Daemon studied her. What do you seek? Vengeance? Answers. Her eyes burned with the same fire that lived in him, and though he did not trust easily, Daemon knew the gods did not deal in chance. Then ride with me, he said at last. I've business with the Freys, and perhaps our paths lead to the same place. She looked at him a long moment, then nodded once. I'll ride with you, but if you turn on me, I won't, he said simply. I've nothing left worth betraying. Outside, the storm broke, rain pounding on the inn's roof. The fire guttered low, and the Frey men by the hearth whispered to each other before slipping out into the night. Daemon watched them go, his hand on his sword's hilt. The War of the Five Kings had begun long ago, but in that rain-soaked dawn beneath the crackle of dying embers, another war was being born. A quieter one, a darker one, and Sir Daemon Rivers had just taken his first step into it. The morning broke gray and heavy with mist, the kind that clung to the grass and softened the edges of the world. Daemon and the northern woman, who named herself Lyra, rode from the crossroads before the sun fully rose. Behind them, the inn faded into shadow, its windows still aglow with the faint orange of the dying fire. Their horses moved quietly along the river road, hooves muffled by wet earth. The land was scarred, fields trampled, cottages burned, trees felled for makeshift palisades. Ravens followed them for miles, black wings flashing against the pale sky. Daemon said little, and Lyra less. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Words were for when steel was sheathed, and peace was more than a memory. By midday, they reached the edge of what had once been a thriving hamlet. Now it was ash and bones. Charred carts lay in ditches, and the stench of old smoke hung in the air. Daemon dismounted to search the ruins, kicking aside a fallen beam to reveal the faded sigil of House Frey painted on a wooden crate. Frey supplies, he muttered. This far from the twins? That's strange. Lyra crouched beside him. These people were small folk. What business would the Freys have here? None worth burning a village for, Daemon said darkly. He lifted the crate's lid. Inside lay bundles of dried meat and hardtack, still good. They left in a hurry. Lyra's hand brushed over a scorched scrap of parchment half buried in the mud. She smoothed it out carefully. The ink had run, but Daemon could make out a few words. Riverrun. Guests. The feast must not be delayed. He looked up sharply. A feast? Lord Walder Frey loves his feasts, Lyra said with a trace of bitterness. But in war, every meal has a purpose. Daemon folded the parchment and tucked it into his cloak. We'll keep it. Might be more to it than we know. They made camp by the river that night. The rain had eased, leaving the air cold and damp. Daemon built a small fire and laid his sword across his knees as he cleaned it. Lyra sat opposite him, watching the flames dance. "You said your brother carried a message for Robb Stark," Daemon began. "What sort of message?" She hesitated before answering. "He never told me. Only that it came from one of Robb's bannermen in the north, Lord Umber, I think. But he was secretive. I think he feared spies." "Spies?" Daemon frowned. "Among the northern lords?" She nodded. "He said some men were loyal to Robb in name, but not in heart. That's why he traveled alone, without escort." Daemon leaned back, the firelight glinting off his eyes. "If what you say is true, your brother may have stumbled upon something dangerous, something worth killing for." The wind sighed through the reeds. Lyra's gaze hardened. "Then we'll find who killed him. I don't care if it's a lion, a trout, or a wolf." He admired her resolve. Few spoke so plainly in times when loyalty could mean a death sentence. Before dawn, a faint horn sounded from the hills. 3 short notes, then silence. Daemon and Lyra exchanged glances. He doused the fire, drew his sword, and motioned her to mount. They rode up the slope through thinning mist until they saw them. 3 riders moving slowly along the opposite ridge, their cloaks mottled gray and brown. Not Frey men, Daemon noted. These wore no sigil at all. "Scouts," he whispered. One of the riders caught sight of them and raised a hand. Daemon kicked his horse forward, closing the distance. The men turned, bolting toward the trees. Daemon spurred harder. His horse was lean but swift, and he caught the last of them near the stream. The man turned in panic, swinging a rusty axe. Daemon's blade flashed once, clean and sure. The man fell, blood spreading across the water like spilled ink. Lyra galloped up behind him. "You didn't need to kill him." "He wore no colors," Daemon said flatly, searching the corpse. "Which means no loyalty. That's reason enough." He found a sealed scroll tucked in the man's jerkin. The wax bore a faint sigil, twin towers beneath a crown. Frey's mark again. Lyra's eyes widened. Another Frey message. Daemon broke the seal and read aloud. "Lord Walder confirms his allegiance to the crown and awaits instructions. The northern host will not suspect. The wedding shall be their ruin." He looked up, the parchment trembling slightly in his hand. "Wedding? It must mean the pact between Robb and the Freys, the one he broke when he married that Westerling girl." Lyra paled. "Then this isn't a letter of loyalty. It's a death warrant." Daemon crushed the scroll. "If this message reaches the twins, it may already be too late. We have to reach River Run before it does." They rode hard through the night, sleeping only in snatches by the roadside. The moon rose full and white above the river, casting silver across their path. Once, Daemon caught sight of fires far off to the west. Perhaps Lannister camps, perhaps worse. By the 3rd day, they came upon a band of men guarding a bridge. They wore the trout of House Tully and hailed Daemon as kin when they saw the sigil on his sword. Their captain, Sir Edric Piper, recognized him at once. "7 hells, Daemon Rivers. I thought you were dead." "Nearly," Daemon said grimly. "We've come with news for Lord Edmure. The Freys are plotting something, a trap." Edric's expression darkened. "We've heard whispers, but no one dares accuse the Freys outright. They still hold the bridge at the Twins. They won't hold it long if Robb Stark learns their treachery," Lyra said sharply. Edric studied her, then nodded. "You'd best come to River Run. Lord Edmure will want to hear this himself." That night they reached the fortress. River Run stood proud as ever. The war had etched weariness into its walls. Soldiers moved along the battlements, and the air was thick with the smell of forge smoke and damp stone. Lord Edmure received them in the great hall, weary-eyed but courteous. Daemon knelt and placed the Frey letter upon the table. Edmure read it, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. "This," he breathed. "If true, it means the Freys mean to betray us, but Robb is already bound for the twins to make amends. He'll be there within days." "Then we must warn him," Daemon urged. "Send riders north at once." Edmure hesitated. "If the letter is false, it could doom what little trust remains between our houses." Lyra stepped forward, fire in her voice. "If you do nothing, you'll doom your king instead." The hall fell silent. Edmure looked between them, torn. Finally, he nodded. "I'll send word, but the gods help us if this proves false." When they left the hall, Daemon caught Lyra's arm. "We've done what we can here, but if Robb's already at the twins, then we ride there," she said without hesitation. "If the gods won't save him, we will." Daemon looked out toward the river, its waters black beneath the moonlight. Somewhere beyond those currents, the twins waited, two towers rising like teeth from the mist, and beneath their stone arches, betrayal was already stirring. He tightened his grip on his sword and mounted his horse once more. "Then let's ride," he said, "before the feast begins." They rode at dawn, the mists curling low across the river like pale ghosts. The road north wound through the desolate riverlands, where smoke still rose from distant farmsteads and the cries of carrion birds echoed through the bare woods. Daemon rode ahead, his cloak whipping in the wind, while Lyra followed close behind, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the twins would stand. The air grew colder with every league. Word had traveled fast along the river. Lord Robb Stark was bound for the twins to seek peace with the Freys. The young wolf's host marched in good order, banners flying, drums echoing like thunder across the land. Yet Daemon could not shake the feeling of dread that settled deeper with each mile. By midday, they passed a half-ruined sept, where a group of small folk huddled under torn cloths for shelter. Daemon reined in, tossing down what little coin he had left. An old woman rose to meet him, her hands trembling. "Bless you, sir," she whispered. "Are you with the young wolf?" "We ride to warn him," Daemon said, her eyes filled with fear. "Then ride fast. The Freys have been busy these past days. Their men took my son to work the kitchens, said there was a feast coming." Daemon's stomach turned. "A feast?" The old woman nodded. "For peace," they said. "But they've built gallows near the riverbank, and they've sharpened their knives." Lyra looked to Daemon. "It's begun already." He gave a short nod and pressed his heels to his horse's flanks. They galloped until the sept and its ragged dwellers were lost behind them. As night fell, a soft rain began to fall, turning the road to mud. They found a low ridge to shelter beneath and made a small fire, hidden from sight. Lyra sat close to the flames, her cloak steaming, her hair clinging damply to her cheeks. Daemon was sharpening his blade when she spoke. "You've seen battle before, more than once." He nodded. "I fought in the Blackwater, under the Tully banner, saw wildfire turn men to ash. I thought I'd seen the worst of war. I was wrong. What made you stay?" "The river runs in my blood," he said quietly. "But family never did. When my father would not name me, I swore I'd make my own honor." He looked into the fire. "It seems I've only made enemies." Lyra gave a faint, rueful smile. "Then we are alike." They slept little. Daemon woke before dawn to the sound of distant horns. Not warning horns, but a slow, steady call. The kind sounded when an army was on the march. He climbed the ridge and saw torchlight far to the north, like a chain of fire winding across the plain. "Robb's host," he murmured. By midday they caught sight of the king in the North's vanguard, men of the Karstarks, Umbers, and Mormonts among them. Daemon and Lyra approached cautiously. The guards challenged them, but when Daemon named himself and produced Lord Edmure's seal, they were allowed through. They found the king's host encamped in a wide meadow near the river. Robb Stark's banner, gray direwolf on white, snapped in the cold wind. The camp was alive with movement, smiths hammering at armor, men cooking over open fires, hounds barking. They were led to a large tent where Robb's bannermen were gathered. Daemon entered first, bowing low before the young king. Robb looked weary beyond his years, his hair damp from rain, his expression grave. Beside him stood his mother, Lady Catelyn, her eyes red with worry. "Sir Daemon Rivers," Robb said. "You bear a message from River Run?" "A warning, Your Grace," Daemon said. He drew the crumpled letter from his cloak and laid it upon the table. "From Lord Walder Frey to the Lannisters, it speaks of betrayal, of a feast that will bring ruin to your host." Catelyn's hand flew to her mouth as she read, "7 gods preserve us." Robb's jaw tightened. This could be a forgery. "It's not," Lyra said, stepping forward. "My brother carried another message meant for you from the north. He was murdered on Frey lands before he could deliver it. The Freys have no honor left." Catelyn turned sharply to her. "And who are you, child?" "Lyra Snow of Winterfell," she replied, meeting her gaze. "My brother was Branrick Snow, sworn to the Starks." Recognition flickered in Catelyn's eyes. "I remember him. A brave man. If he's fallen, then the gods have taken one of our own." Robb studied the parchment again. "Even if this is true, we cannot turn back now. The Freys hold the bridge we need to cross. Without it, we're trapped between the Lannisters and the river." "Then ride around," Daemon urged. "Take the long road east." "We'd lose weeks," Robb said. "Our men have already begun the crossing. Lord Walder has offered bread and salt. If he means to betray us under guest right, he invites his own damnation." Catelyn's voice was soft but trembling. "Walder Frey has always believed himself above damnation." A silence fell over the tent. The only sound was the wind lashing against the canvas. Finally, Robb said, "You've done your duty, Sir Daemon. You and your companion will ride with my mother's guard. If there is treachery, we'll face it together." They departed at first light. The Freys bridge appeared through the mist like some grim vision, the twin towers rising high above the river, their torches burning bright. Between them stretched the long stone span, guarded by Frey men in gray and blue. A banner hung from the battlements, freshly painted. "House Frey welcomes its kingly guests." Daemon's gut twisted. The Frey courtyard was alive with bustle. Servants hurried to and fro, tables being laden with meat and wine. Music drifted from the great hall, a cheerful, hollow sound. Lord Walder himself awaited Robb in the yard, his face wrinkled as old parchment, his mouth pulled into a thin smile. "My honored king," he rasped, bowing mockingly low, "and his gracious mother. You bring warmth to my hall on this cold day." Robb dismounted, clasping the old man's shoulder. "Lord Frey, we've come to make amends. I pray this feast will mend what was broken." "Aye," Walder said, his eyes glittering. "It shall." Daemon and Lyra watched from the shadows as the guests were led inside. Music rose, mingling with laughter and the clatter of cups. Yet beneath it all, Daemon heard something else, the measured tread of boots behind the walls, the faint clink of steel. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "It's happening." He nodded grimly. "Then we find a way to stop it." They slipped away from the main hall, moving through a narrow corridor where the air smelled of damp stone. From within, they heard the sound of a bard tuning his harp. The melody began slow and soft, the rains of Castamere. Lyra froze. The Lannisters' song. The doors burst open. Screams filled the hall. Daemon drew his sword and ran toward the noise, but a crossbow bolt shattered the torch beside him. The corridor filled with Frey men, their blades wet with wine and blood. "Back!" Daemon shouted. He parried a thrust, drove his knee into a guard's gut, and sent him sprawling. Lyra seized a fallen dagger and fought beside him, swift as a cat. They cut their way through the passage until they reached a narrow stair that led to the courtyard. Outside, chaos ruled. Men in wolf cloaks lay cut down where they'd stood. Fire leapt from the windows. Daemon saw Robb's banner fall, the direwolf consumed by flame. He caught Lyra's arm and dragged her toward the stables. "We can't save them. We have to try. Too late," he roared. "If we die here, their deaths mean nothing." They mounted and rode through the gate as arrows hissed past. Behind them, the twins burned, and the river shone red beneath the moonlight. Neither spoke for many miles. When at last they stopped at the edge of the woods, Lyra dismounted and fell to her knees, shaking. "It's over," she whispered. "The king in the north is dead." Daemon looked back toward the distant towers, where the flames still flickered like dying stars. "No," he said softly. "The king is dead, but the north remembers, and so shall we." He turned his gaze to the dark horizon. "There's another war coming, Lyra, a war of shadows, and we'll be the first to fight it." The night wind carried the stench of blood far across the river, mingling with the smoke of burning banners and the faint echo of dying music. Daemon and Lyra rode until their horses could bear no more, finally dismounting in a small copse of black pine. The world around them was silent, save for the whisper of the trees. Daemon stood for a long while, staring back toward the twins. The flames had dimmed now, only a dull red glow upon the horizon. Every man who had marched under the direwolf was dead, or soon would be. Robb Stark, Catelyn Tully, the great northern houses, all betrayed under guest right. The gods themselves would curse the Freys for that. Lyra sat against a tree trunk, her cloak drawn tight around her. The firelight flickered across her pale face, and her eyes were hollow, unseeing. She had fought her way through hell that night. She had watched brave men fall, her kin's banners trampled into the mud. "They're gone," she whispered. "All of them. The Starks, the North, everything." Daemon knelt beside her. "No, not all. You're still breathing, and so am I. The North isn't dead while any of its blood still flows." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "What good is blood now? The Freys hold the river, the Lannisters hold the throne, and every honest man has been butchered." He said nothing. There were no words that could soften such truth. The War of the Five Kings had never been about honor or justice. It was power that ruled, and power cared little for oaths. When dawn came, gray and cold, Daemon buried his sword in the damp earth and said a silent prayer. Not to the Seven, nor to the old gods, but to whatever might still be listening. Then he turned to Lyra. "We can't linger here. Frey scouts will be sweeping the countryside before noon." "Where will we go?" she asked numbly. "East," he said, "to the Vale. There are still lords there who hate the Lannisters enough to listen. If we can reach them, maybe we can warn what's left of the North." They rode through the morning mist, following the narrow forest paths that wound toward the foothills. The riverlands lay broken behind them, fields stripped bare, villages deserted, bodies floating in the shallows. The land itself seemed to mourn. By midday, they came upon a small farmstead still standing, though its roof sagged and its gate hung broken. Damon approached cautiously, hand on his hilt. From within came the faint clatter of a pail. An old man stepped out, bent-backed and gray. He stared at them with rheumy eyes. "No need for blades, sir," he croaked. "No soldiers here, only ghosts and hunger." Damon lowered his sword. "You've heard what happened at the Twins?" The old man spat into the dirt. "The whole world's heard by now. The Freys sent riders through at dawn, boasting like crows. Said the king in the north lost his head, and his wolf's head besides." Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. Damon placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Do the Freys ride this way often?" he asked. "Too often," said the man. "They take what they please. My sons are dead. My wife's gone to the gods. I stay because someone must bury the ones they leave behind." He shuffled back inside, returning with a small loaf of coarse bread. "Take it," he said. "You've the look of those still fighting, though I don't know for whom anymore." Damon accepted it with a nod. "For those who can't fight," he said quietly. They rode on, and for a time neither spoke. The road curved upward through rolling hills until the air grew thin and cool. Ravens followed them again, dark shadows circling above. At dusk, they reached a narrow pass between two ridges. Damon halted, scanning the rocks ahead. "Someone's been here," he murmured. Boot prints in the mud, a broken spear haft by the stream. Not long ago. Before he could speak further, figures stepped out from behind the rocks. Half a dozen men in patched armor, faces masked with dirt. Bandits, or worse. "Well met, travelers," said the one in front, a lean man with a scar down his cheek. "The roads aren't safe, you know. Might be best if you paid a small toll for passage." Damon's hand went to his sword. "And if we don't?" The man grinned, revealing broken teeth. "Then you'll pay in other ways." Steel flashed. Damon moved first, his blade cutting through the leader's throat before the man could finish his laugh. Lyra darted behind him, swift as a shadow, driving her dagger into the gut of the next attacker. The fight was brutal and short. Two men fled, another fell to Damon's backhanded strike. When it was done, Lyra stood breathing hard, her hands slick with blood. "I thought they were just thieves," she said. "They were killers," Damon replied coldly. "Look." He turned over the dead leader's cloak. Beneath the grime was the faint outline of twin towers. "Frey men," Lyra whispered. "Even their outlaws wear his colors now." "They're clearing the land," Damon said grimly. "No witnesses left to tell the tale." They dragged the bodies to the stream and left them for the crows. When they rode on, the clouds had gathered low and heavy, and thunder rolled in the distance. That night, they took shelter in the ruins of an old sept, its roof caved in, its altar overgrown with moss. Lyra lit a small fire while Damon tended to the horses. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. Lyra sat watching the flames, her voice quiet. "Do you ever wonder why the gods let this happen?" Damon sat beside her, shaking his head. "The gods don't start wars. Men do, and men end them." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "You speak like a man who's lost faith." "Faith won't stop a blade," he said simply. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the roof, casting shadows like ghosts upon the walls. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain drummed on the stones like the beat of distant war drums. When Damon finally lay down, he dreamt of the red wedding again. The hall full of laughter, then screams. Robb Stark falling with arrows in his back. Catelyn's face as her throat was cut. The direwolf's head sewn to the king's body. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, the taste of ash on his tongue. Lyra was already awake, her dagger in hand, her eyes fixed on the doorway. "Riders," she whispered. Outside, hooves thudded softly in the mud. Damon rose, sword drawn, and peered through the cracks in the wall. 6 men, cloaked in gray, bearing the Frey sigil. Scouts. He glanced at Lyra, and she nodded. Without a word, they slipped through the rear of the ruined sept and mounted quickly. The riders saw them and shouted, giving chase. Arrows hissed past as they fled into the trees. Branches whipped their faces, mud splattered their cloaks, and thunder boomed above. Damon's horse stumbled once, but recovered, galloping faster. At last, they burst from the forest onto open ground, and ahead lay the faint glimmer of torchlight. A small encampment, banners fluttering in the storm. A silver trout, the sigil of House Tully. Damon spurred his horse forward, shouting over the rain, "Hold! Hold your fire!" The sentries lowered their spears just in time. Damon and Lyra rode in, gasping for breath. A man stepped from the largest tent, his face grim. Damon recognized him at once. Sir Edric Piper, the same man who had once guarded Riverrun's bridge. "Rivers," Edric said, astonished. "By all the gods you live." "Barely," Damon replied. "Robb Stark is dead. The Freys have betrayed us all." Edric's face hardened. "We heard. Some escaped the slaughter. We're gathering what men we can. You'll ride with us." Damon looked at Lyra, rain dripping from his hair. "Then the war isn't over." "No," Edric said. "It's only changed its shape. The wolves are dead, but the river still flows." Damon turned his gaze northward, where the storm clouds gathered like an army of shadows. "Then let it flow in blood if it must. The Freys will answer for what they've done." And in that rain-soaked dawn, among the ruins of broken vows and burnt banners, a new oath was sworn. A vow not of knighthood or fealty, but of vengeance. The Red Wedding had ended one war, but in its ashes, another had begun. The camp beside the river was a gathering of ghosts, men who had lost their banners, their brothers, their purpose. Their faces were drawn and hollow, their armor rusted and mismatched. They were the remnants of a dream that had died in fire and song at the Twins. Some were Tully men, some Northern, and some nameless wanderers who clung to the only thing left to them, revenge. Damon Rivers walked among them at dawn, the mist curling about his boots. His cloak was torn, his hair damp with dew, but his eyes burned with grim resolve. Lyra followed a few steps behind, silent and watchful. Her face was pale with exhaustion, yet there was something fierce in her still, a flame that refused to die. Sir Edric Piper stood by the riverbank, sharpening his sword. He looked up as Damon approached. "We've gathered near 60 men," he said. "All that's left from Riverrun's levies and those that fled the Frey's knives. The rest have gone to ground, or worse." "60 is enough," Damon replied. "Enough to strike fear, if not to win." Edric's mouth twitched in a humorless smile. "Fear won't win a war, Damon." "No," Damon said, "but it'll remind them the war isn't done." Behind them, Lyra was tending to a wounded boy, no older than 16. His leg was wrapped in linen, dark with blood, but he bit his lip and bore it without complaint. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Tom," the boy said. "Tom Waters. My lord was killed at the feast. I ran when the music turned." Lyra's hands paused for a moment, but she said nothing. She tightened the bandage and looked to Damon. "They killed children too. No one was spared." "They've sown their field with corpses," Damon said quietly. "Now let them reap it." By midday, Edric had gathered the men around the fire. "We can't meet the Freys in open battle," he said, "but we can bleed them. Their riders move in small patrols. We know these lands better than they do. Every bridge, every stream, every wood." Daemon nodded. "Then we strike from the shadows, burn their supply trains, cut their messengers, free any prisoners we find, make them fear every rustle of the trees." The men murmured their approval. There was no cheer, only a grim nodding of heads. They were men past cheering. That night, the first blood of the new war was spilled. Daemon led 20 riders north through the mist, their torches hidden, their armor muffled with rags. The Freys had built a small outpost at a crossroads near a ruined mill, 3 miles from the river. A garrison of 12 men, careless and drunk. Daemon's band surrounded them before dawn. At his signal, arrows flew from the dark, striking the guards before they could cry alarm. Then the riders swept in, steel glinting, hooves pounding. Daemon's sword found throats and bellies, and the night echoed with screams and the crackle of fire. When it was done, the outpost burned. Smoke rose into the gray sky, a black finger pointing toward the heavens. Lyra rode up beside him, her face streaked with ash. "They'll send riders after us now." "Let them," Daemon said. "Every man they send hunting us is one less guarding the twins." As they returned to camp, Daemon's thoughts turned dark. The Freys had broken all laws of gods and men, yet the crown and King's Landing would reward them for it. He wondered what kind of realm was left when such men prospered. When they reached the river, Edric met them with grim news. "Scouts report a Lannister host moving east," he said. "Under Sir Davin Lannister, 200 strong. They mean to sweep the Riverlands clean of rebels. Then they'll find more than they bargained for," Daemon said. Over the next week, the War of Shadows spread. Daemon's band struck swift and vanished faster, burning supply lines, ambushing patrols, vanishing into woods and mists before the Lannisters could strike back. The Freys sent men to hunt them, but few returned. The people of the Riverlands began to whisper of the Riverwolf, a bastard knight who haunted the rivers by night, striking with silent vengeance. Lyra became his shadow, his right hand. Where Daemon rode, she rode. Where he bled, she fought beside him. She had learned the sword quickly, her strikes sharp and ruthless. Yet there was sorrow in her still. Sometimes when the fires were low, she would take from her cloak a small locket, a token her brother had worn, and stare at it until dawn. One night, after a raid near Fair Market, Daemon found her sitting apart from the others, the silver locket glinting faintly in her hands. "You fight harder than most knights," he said. She looked up, eyes glistening. "Because I can't stop seeing their faces. The men at the feast, my brother among them. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the song." Daemon sat beside her. "Then let that memory be your weapon. It's sharper than any blade." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who's forgotten what peace feels like." "I never knew it," he said. The next morning, Edric brought tidings from the south. "Riverrun has fallen," he said. "The Blackfish escaped, but Lord Edmure has been taken captive. The Freys hold the castle now, with Lannister garrisons inside its walls." Daemon felt the words like a blow. Riverrun, the heart of the Riverlands, the seat of his father's house, taken by those who had butchered his kin. "Then our path is clear," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We take back what's ours." Edric hesitated. "We can't storm Riverrun, Daemon. Not with 60 men." "Not yet," Daemon said. "But we can bleed them from within. There are tunnels beneath the keep, old smugglers' ways from the river. My father had them sealed years ago, but I remember their place. Lyra's eyes met his. You mean to go inside? Yes, Daemon said. And when I do, I'll make Walder Frey wish he'd drowned at birth. 3 nights later, beneath a moon thin as a blade, they rode toward Riverrun. The castle rose above the confluence of rivers, its towers glinting in the starlight. The banners that flew were no longer the silver trout, but twin towers and a golden lion. They left their horses in the reeds and moved on foot. Daemon led the way to a narrow inlet along the south wall, half hidden by willow branches. He knelt and brushed aside the moss to reveal an iron grate, rusted but intact. This is it, he said. The old waterway. Lyra gripped her dagger. If we go in there, there's no turning back. There never was, Daemon said, and pried the grate loose. The tunnel beyond was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of damp stone. They waded through waist-deep water, their torches faint and flickering. The sound of the river above was a constant whisper, like the murmur of the dead. At last, they came to a narrow stair that climbed upward into shadow. Daemon motioned for silence and pushed the door at the top open a crack. Beyond lay the lower vaults of Riverrun, storerooms and cellars. He stepped inside. Somewhere above, faint music drifted through the halls, the Freys feasting again, laughing as though they hadn't drowned the world in blood. Daemon's hand tightened around his sword. Tonight, he whispered, the river remembers. And with Lyra at his side, he began to climb toward the heart of the castle, where vengeance waited in the dark. The cellars of Riverrun were cold as tombs. The stones sweated with damp, and the air was heavy with the scent of grain, wine, and old dust. Daemon led the way through the narrow passageways, his torch casting long shadows upon the walls. Lyra followed close behind, her dagger drawn, her breath steady despite the chill that bit at her bones. They moved like ghosts beneath the fortress that had once stood proud under the banners of House Tully. Now the sigil of the twin towers hung from the battlements above, and the laughter of their conquerors echoed faintly through the stone. The Freys feasted, blind to the vengeance that crept beneath their feet. Daemon paused at the base of a spiral stair, listening. Boots clattered somewhere above, followed by the clink of goblets and the lazy murmur of guards. 2 men, he whispered. We'll deal with them quietly. He ascended without sound, his blade glinting in the flicker of the torchlight. When the first guard turned, Daemon's sword slid through his throat before a word could escape. The second drew breath to shout, but Lyra was faster. Her dagger flashed once, burying itself beneath his ribs. The man gasped and fell without a cry. They dragged the bodies aside and continued upward. The stair opened into a corridor lined with barrels and crates. From somewhere ahead came laughter, cruel and careless. Daemon crept to the doorway and peered inside. 6 Frey soldiers sat around a fire pit, drinking and boasting of the Red Wedding. On a spit above, the fire turned the carcass of a boar. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, raised his cup. "To Lord Walder," he bellowed, "and to the wolves who learned to dance." The men roared with laughter. Daemon stepped into the room. "A poor jest," he said, his voice calm as steel. The laughter died. The men turned, confusion giving way to alarm. Daemon's sword was already in motion. The first fell before he could rise, his blood splattering across the table. Lyra slipped in beside Daemon, her blade flashing in the firelight. The fight was brutal, but brief. When it ended, the flames crackled quietly over the bodies of the dead. Daemon wiped his sword on a fallen man's cloak. "That's for the feast," he said. They left the hall behind and pressed deeper into the keep. The castle was vast, its corridors dimly lit by flickering torches. Once, River Run had been full of life, servants, guards, the smell of hearth fire and bread. Now, it was a fortress of silence and foreign banners. As they moved through the passages, they passed cells where northern prisoners were kept. The stench was foul, and from the darkness came weak voices begging for water or mercy. Daemon forced himself to look. These were men of the north, starved and beaten, left to rot for their loyalty. He knelt beside one of the cages. Inside lay an old man with a grizzled beard and eyes still sharp despite the hunger in them. "Who are you?" Daemon asked softly. The man stirred. "Was once Sir Malin of House Reed," he rasped. "Served under Lord Bolton before he betrayed us all." "Bolton," Lyra spat. "He was with Robb at the feast. He turned his cloak with the phrase." Daemon gritted his teeth. "Then he'll die with them." He drew his dagger and broke the lock. "Can you still fight?" Sir Malin gave a grim smile. "For vengeance, always." One by one they freed the other captives, a handful of men barely strong enough to stand, but whose eyes burned with the same fire. They armed them with blades taken from the fallen Freys, and together they climbed toward the upper levels. At last they reached the great hall. The doors stood open, and light spilled out, torchlight and the orange glow of a roaring fire. Inside, Lord Emmon Frey, Walder's son-in-law, sat at the high table surrounded by guards. He was a plump man, red-faced and smug, drinking from a silver goblet as musicians played a slow tune. Daemon's fingers tightened around his sword hilt. "That one dies first," he murmured. Lyra nodded once. They burst through the doors like a storm. The music stopped. For a heartbeat, the hall froze. Frey men staring in disbelief at the blood-streaked figures standing in the doorway. Then Daemon's voice rang out, clear and cold. "For the Red Wedding," he said, and charged. The first guard barely raised his sword before Daemon's blade split him from shoulder to breast. Lyra moved like a shadow beside him, her dagger finding gaps in armor with deadly precision. The freed prisoners followed, shouting hoarse cries of vengeance as they fell upon their captors. Panic spread. Emmon Frey stumbled backward, shouting for his men. Daemon leapt onto the dais, knocking aside a servant who lunged at him. His sword met Emmon's, steel clanging against steel. The Frey lord fought desperately, but Daemon's fury was greater. He drove the man back step by step until his blade found flesh. Emmon fell, choking on his blood. Daemon stood over him, breathing hard. "Tell your father," he said softly. "The river remembers." He turned to the others. "Burn it," he commanded. Lyra and the freed men set torches to the tapestries and the wooden beams. The flames caught quickly, climbing the walls like hungry spirits. The air filled with smoke and the screams of dying men. They fled down the stairs as the fire consumed the hall. Behind them, the castle that had once been the pride of House Tully burned anew, not in conquest, but in reckoning. When they reached the riverbank, dawn was breaking. The eastern sky was painted red, as if the gods themselves had spilled blood across it. Daemon stood watching the flames devour the fortress, his expression unreadable. Lyra came to stand beside him. "We've done what we came for," she said quietly. "For tonight," Daemon replied. "But this is only a beginning. The Freys will strike back, and the Lannisters will not stand idle. Then we keep fighting." He turned to her. The light of the rising sun caught her face, and for a moment, he saw not the weary warrior she had become, but the girl she might once have been. "You should leave this war behind," he said. "Find a place where it cannot reach you." Lyra shook her head. My place is here. The North remembers, and I remember with it. Daemon gave a slow nod. Then we ride north. They mounted their horses, the survivors following behind, weary but alive. The smoke of River Run trailed behind them like a banner of vengeance as they rode along the river's edge. The War of the Five Kings was fading, but in its shadow, a new struggle was beginning. A war not for crowns or thrones, but for the soul of the realm itself. And at its heart rode a bastard knight and a northern woman, bound not by oaths, but by the blood of those they had lost and the vengeance yet to come. As the sun climbed over the horizon, Daemon looked to the distant hills where the road curved toward the north. The Freys will think the river silent, he said. Let them. We'll show them it still has teeth. Lyra's lips curved into a thin, fierce smile. Then let the river bite deep. They spurred their horses forward, and the sound of hooves carried through the morning mist, the echo of vengeance reborn. The northern road was little more than a ribbon of mud and broken stone, winding through the wild hills where men seldom traveled. Daemon and Lyra rode at the head of the column, their cloaks drawn close against the cold. Behind them, the ragged band of survivors followed in weary silence. 20 riders now, no more. The rest had scattered after River Run burned, seeking their homes or their graves. The wind cut sharp from the north, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Winter was creeping down from the wall, slow but relentless. Daemon could feel it in his bones, a warning whispered by the gods themselves. The realm had been torn by war, and now winter would finish what men had begun. They reached a small village by the river's bend, half-burnt, abandoned, its well choked with ash. A single dog barked when they approached, then vanished into the trees. Daemon dismounted and walked among the ruins, the crunch of frost beneath his boots. In one of the houses he found a child's toy, carved from wood, a little horse, its legs broken. He turned it over once in his hand, then set it gently down again. Do you think anyone still lives here? Lyra asked, her breath misting in the air. If they do, they're hiding from more than hunger, Daemon said. They found an old woman in the barn, wrapped in rags and straw. Her eyes were clouded, but she spoke when they offered her water. You're not Freys, she said, peering at Daemon. Not with that face. You've the look of Tully blood, though you wear no trout. I once did, Daemon said, before the Freys took it from me. The woman spat weakly into the dirt. They take from everyone. You'll not find peace here, Sir Knight. The red men ride from Harrenhal now. They burn every farm they pass. Said it's the king's justice. Who's king? Lyra asked bitterly. The woman laughed, a sound like dry reeds. Does it matter? They all wear crowns, but it's we who drown beneath them. They left her food and firewood before riding on. Daemon said little as they climbed into the higher hills, but Lyra could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. She knew that look, the one he wore before he did something dangerous. By dusk, snow began to fall, thin at first, then thick enough to blur the trees. They found shelter in the ruins of a watchtower, its stones half collapsed, its roof long gone. The men made a small fire in the lee of the wall, and Daemon stood apart, staring northward where the land disappeared into white. Lyra joined him. You mean to keep going? Yes, he said. The Freys won't stop at the river. They'll march north, and the Boltons will open the gates for them. You think Rose Bolton will bring his men south again? He will if it serves him, Daemon said darkly. He betrayed his king once. He'll do it again if it fattens his coffers. Lyra drew her cloak tighter. "Then where do we go?" "To those who will still fight," he said. "There are northern lords who won't bend the knee to the Dreadfort. The Manderleys, perhaps, or the remnants of the Karstarks. The North remembers, even if it sleeps." That night, the storm grew fierce. Snow howled through the gaps in the wall, and the men huddled close to the fire. Daemon kept watch, his hand resting on his sword. He thought of his sister, of Robb Stark, of the river that ran red beneath the twins. His vengeance had begun, but it was far from done. At dawn, the storm broke. The world lay buried under white, the river frozen at its edges. Daemon roused the men, and they rode north once more. The cold bit at their faces, but no one complained. The land grew wilder, the forests thicker, the silence deeper. By the third day, they reached a deep gorge where the river vanished beneath a shroud of mist. A narrow bridge of rotting planks spanned the gap. Daemon reined in his horse and stared across. On the far side stood a small group of riders. Their cloaks were black, their faces hidden. When Daemon raised a hand, the lead rider moved forward, a tall man with a scar across his cheek and the pale eyes of the north. "Hold," the man called. "State your name and purpose." "Sir Daemon Rivers," Daemon replied. "Once of River Run, now of No House. We ride north to find those still loyal to the Starks." The man studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "Then you'll find no foes here. I'm Hal Manderley, sworn to White Harbor. We've been hunting Frey riders in these woods. You've made quite a name for yourself, River Wolf." Daemon gave a grim smile. "Names are for the living. I'll keep mine when the Freys are dead." Hal gestured for them to cross. "Come, we've a camp 2 leagues north. You'll want to see what we've found." They followed him through the trees until the land opened to a small valley. There, hidden beneath the pines, was a northern encampment, perhaps 100 men, hardened and silent. The banners that hung were tattered but proud, a merman with a trident, the white direwolf, and others Daemon did not know. In the center stood a great tent, and from within came voices. Daemon entered and found a map spread across a table, weighted by stones. Around it stood 3 men, Hal Manderley, a gray-bearded knight in Karstark colors, and a woman cloaked in black. When she turned, Daemon felt a jolt of surprise. Her hair was silver gold, and her eyes sharp as ice. "You're far south for a knight of the rivers," she said. "And you're far north for a lady," Daemon replied. She smiled faintly. "Lady Alice Karstark, for what that's worth now. We've heard of you. The bastard knight who burns Frey castles. You've given hope where there was none." "I didn't do it for hope," Daemon said. "I did it because no one else would." Alice nodded. "Then you'll fit well among us. We've begun our own rebellion. Quiet for now. But when the snows settle, we'll rise. The Freys have stretched too far, and the Bolton's wolves are hated in every hall." Daemon studied the map. "You mean to strike from the woods?" "From everywhere," Hal Manderley said. "The north bleeds, but it breathes. If we strike together, we can drive them south." Lyra stepped forward. "And who leads us?" Alice's gaze turned northward. "The true king, when he returns." Daemon frowned. "Robb Stark is dead. His name is Jon," she said softly. "Snow by birth, but Stark by blood. Word from the wall says he's risen high among the Black Brothers. When the time comes, we'll need someone to remind him that the North is not yet lost." The name stirred something in Lyra's eyes, a flicker of memory, of the brother she'd loved and lost. "Jon Snow," she murmured. Daemon looked from her to Alice. Then I'll ride for him when the snows ease. Until then, we'll keep cutting at the frays wherever they hold ground." Alice inclined her head. "The river wolf fights for the north then. I'll see to it your men are fed and armed. You'll need both in the days to come." That night, as the fire crackled and the camp settled to uneasy sleep, Damon stood outside his tent, gazing at the northern stars. Lyra joined him, silent as ever. "Do you believe it?" she asked. "That Jon Snow might rise to claim the north?" "Belief's a luxury," Damon said. "But if he's half the man his brother was, he'll not let this stand." Lyra looked to the dark horizon. "Then perhaps there's still hope." Damon's gaze stayed on the stars. "Hope's the last thing war kills," he said. "But until it dies, we fight." The snow fell again before dawn, soft and steady. The north slept beneath its white shroud, but beneath that stillness, something stirred. The faint heartbeat of rebellion, steady and patient. And Daemon Rivers, the river wolf, knew that when it woke, all the rivers of Westeros would run red once more. Snow fell heavy over the pine woods, as though the sky itself sought to bury the world beneath silence. The men of the north moved like shadows through the white, their furs drawn tight, their breath pale ghosts in the frozen air. In the heart of their camp, beneath a canvas darkened with frost, Sir Daemon Rivers bent over a map lit by a single lantern. The River Wolf, they called him now, a name that had begun as a whisper among broken men and spread like fire through the riverlands. To the Freys, it was a curse. To the north, it was a promise. Lyra stood beside him, her hair bound in a tight braid, her eyes fixed on the lines of ink marking roads and rivers. "If we strike the Freys at Seaguard," she said quietly, "the Lannisters will answer. You know they will." "They already have," Daemon replied. "Ravens came at dawn. Sir Davin Lannister rides with 1,000 men, marching to secure the crossings. They'll meet the Freys at Fairmarket by week's end." "Then it's a trap," Lyra said. "Every battle is," Daemon murmured. "It only matters who springs it first." Outside, the wind wailed like something wounded. The northern camp stirred restlessly. Men sharpening blades, tending horses, whispering of vengeance and the long night to come. The banners that fluttered above them were few but proud. The merman of Manderley, the black sunburst of Karstark, and a hastily sewn flag bearing the sigil of House Tully, a silver trout on blood-red cloth. Daemon straightened. "If the Freys mean to move south again, we'll meet them before they join the Lions. We strike hard and vanish before the storm can close around us." Alice Karstark entered then, her face pale beneath the torchlight, her cloak rimed with snow. "Our scouts found movement near the old holdfast of Stonebridge," she said. 200 Freys with Lannister colors among them. They're raiding the river villages for supplies. "Then they'll find death instead," Daemon said. That night, beneath a sky dark as iron, the river wolf and his riders slipped from camp. They moved silently through the trees, hooves muffled by snow. The river glimmered faintly through the woods, a frozen serpent winding through the land. Lyra rode beside Daemon, her face hidden beneath her hood, her bow strapped across her back. Hours passed before the glow of fires appeared in the distance, a cluster of torches flickering near the ruins of Stonebridge. The Freys had made camp in the old watchyard, their horses tethered, their guards careless. Laughter drifted through the night, coarse and loud. Daemon raised a hand. His men halted. He leaned close to Lyra. "Take 10 to the left flank. Cut their escape. When I signal, bring fire." She nodded and vanished into the trees with her riders. Daemon watched her go, quick, certain, fearless, then turned to his men. "No mercy," he whispered. They fell upon the frays like wolves from the dark. Arrows hissed through the air, finding throats and backs. Daemon's sword flashed, carving through the first man who turned toward him. Panic erupted in the camp, men shouting, stumbling, reaching for weapons they had no time to draw. Fire spread through the tents, the flames roaring higher as the wind caught them. Daemon found himself face to face with a knight in gilded armor, a Lannister, his cloak crimson even in the dark. Their swords clashed, steel against steel, sparks leaping in the cold air. The man fought fiercely, but Daemon fought harder. He drove the knight to his knees, tore the helmet away, and saw a boy beneath, no older than 19, his eyes wide with terror. "Please," the boy gasped. "I yield." Daemon's blade came down. "Tell your father," he said softly, "the river wolf yields to none." When it was over, the camp was ash. The Freys who survived fled into the woods, their screams fading into the wind. Daemon's men gathered what they could, food, weapons, armor, and then melted back into the night before reinforcements could come. By dawn, snow covered the battlefield, hiding all traces of what had passed. They rode hard through the day and reached the shelter of the pines by dusk. Lyra rode in silence beside Daemon, blood spattered on her cloak. Her eyes were distant, her hands trembling despite the cold. "You fought well," Daemon said quietly. "I killed men who begged for mercy," she replied. "That's not fighting. That's surviving." He looked at her. "Sometimes there's no difference." She turned her face away. "And when the war ends, what will we be then? Butchers? Ghosts? Alive," he said simply. "That will be enough." That night, the northern lords gathered in the camp's heart. Snow fell thick, muting the crackle of the fires. Alice Karstark spoke first. "We can't keep striking from the shadows forever," she said. "Winter's closing its fist around us. If we're to survive, we need allies." Hal Manderley nodded. "White Harbor has food enough for a season, but not for war. We must reach the coast before the rivers freeze." Daemon studied the map spread between them. "We'll go east," he said. "Follow the river to Salt Pans, then north to the sea. The Freys won't expect us there." "And the Lannisters?" Hal asked. Daemon's gaze was cold. "Let them come. The river has taken worse." When the council ended, Lyra found Daemon standing at the edge of the camp, watching the snow drift down. "You're leading them deeper into danger," she said. "There's nowhere else to go," he replied. "If we stay, we starve. If we move, we fight. At least fighting gives us a choice." She hesitated, then said, "When this began, you fought for vengeance. What do you fight for now?" Daemon was silent for a moment. Then he said, "For the memory of what was lost. For a realm that's forgotten mercy. And for you, perhaps, though you'd call that foolish." Lyra's eyes softened, though she said nothing. The snow fell between them, soft and endless. They marched east the next day, their horses struggling through drifts knee-deep. The river beside them ran black beneath its thin crust of ice. Once they passed a ruined village where crows perched upon the roofs like sentinels. The air smelled of smoke and old death. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a frozen marsh. There, among the reeds, they saw movement, torches, half-hidden figures, the glint of steel. Daemon drew his sword. "Scouts," he whispered, "Fries or worse." Before he could signal his men, a horn sounded, long and low. From the mist emerged riders in black cloaks, their armor rimed with frost, their horses gaunt. They bore no banners, but their leader raised a hand in greeting. "Hold, travelers," he called. "You ride north, yes?" Daemon studied the man. We do. Then you'll want to keep to the east, the stranger said. The Boltons ride this way, 1,000 strong, under the flayed man. A murmur passed through Daemon's men. Lyra's face went pale. Bolton, she whispered. Rose's men are moving already. The stranger inclined his head. The north bleeds again, sir, but there are still those who fight in its name. Head east to the sea. You'll find friends there, and perhaps a greater war than this one. He turned his horse without another word and vanished into the mist. Daemon watched him go, unease knotting in his chest. A greater war, he murmured. Lyra looked at him. What did he mean? I don't know, Daemon said, staring northward where the wind howled across the snow. But whatever it is, we're already in it. The storm rose again that night, and the wind carried with it a distant sound, not thunder, but something older, deeper. The howl of wolves. And Daemon Rivers, the river wolf, felt it in his bones. The north was waking, and the true war had only just begun. The storm broke upon them before dawn, howling down from the north with a fury that seemed born of old, forgotten gods. Snow swept across the marshlands, erasing the road, the river, even the tracks of men and horses. The world turned white, endless and merciless. Daemon Rivers urged his horse onward, his cloak heavy with ice. The men behind him followed grimly, their faces half hidden beneath furs stiff with frost. Lyra rode close at his side, her hood drawn low, her eyes sharp despite the storm. They had ridden for days without rest, fleeing the paths where Bolton scouts were said to roam. The wind carried strange sounds, faint, distant, like cries across the ice. Daemon did not speak of them, nor did Lyra ask. Some things in the north were better left unnamed. By noon, the storm eased enough for them to see the sea in the distance, a gray expanse frozen along its edges. Beyond the shore rose a cluster of low hills crowned with what seemed to be ruins, old watchtowers, their stones blackened by age and fire. There, Daemon said, we'll take shelter. They reached the ruins as twilight fell. The towers were half collapsed, their gates long rotted, but the walls still offered shelter from the wind. Inside, they found an old hearth and the bones of some forgotten garrison. Daemon ordered a fire built, though the wood they carried smoked more than it burned. When warmth finally seeped into their limbs, Lyra sat beside him, holding her hands to the flames. How much farther to White Harbor? She asked. 3 days, if the snows don't deepen, Daemon said. But we'll not find peace there either. Wyman Manderley plays his own game. Every lord does now. Lyra stared into the fire. Is there no one left who fights for something better? Daemon's smile was bitter. Once, maybe. But those men are bones now, buried in the river, or feasting in the halls of their fathers. He rose and walked to the open gate, staring out at the sea. The tide groaned beneath the ice, the waves heaving like the breath of a dying beast. Beyond the mist, lights flickered, small, moving, far too even for fishing boats. Lyra joined him. Ships? Daemon nodded slowly. Too many for traders. They watched as the lights drew closer. In time, shapes emerged from the fog. Long ships, black-hulled, their sails tattered but still bearing faint marks of krakens and spears. Ironborn. Daemon's jaw tightened. The sea wolves come to pick at the corpse of the realm. Lyra's hand went to her dagger. They've seen us. He turned back to the camp. Mount the men. We hold the walls if we must. Moments later, horns sounded from below. The longships had grounded on the icy shore, and figures poured out, armored men with axes and rough laughter that cut through the wind. Their leader came first, tall and broad, his beard bound with iron rings. He carried no banner, only a rusted axe that had seen too much blood. "Who holds these ruins?" he called, his voice booming. "Come forth, if you've courage." Daemon stepped to the gate. "A man who's no friend to reavers." The Ironborn grinned. "Then perhaps a man worth talking to. I am Harlan Pike, captain of the Drowned Vow. We've no quarrel with travelers, unless they're Freys or Boltons." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "You fight the Boltons?" Harlan spat into the snow. "We fight anyone who'd burn our shores. The Dreadfort sent men to take Saltcliffe. Killed my brother and 50 of my kin. So we raided their coast and burned their ships in kind. Seems we've enemies in common." Daemon studied him for a long moment, weighing truth against necessity. "And what do you want of us?" "Shelter for the night," Harlan said, "and a word of the lands beyond. We've heard tell of war brewing again in the north. Some say the wolves are not all dead." Lyra exchanged a glance with Daemon. "Perhaps not," she said softly. Harlan laughed, the sound harsh but not cruel. "Then perhaps there's hope yet. I'd rather fight beside wolves than under flayed men." They shared the hall that night, uneasy allies bound by winter and war. Daemon sat across from the Ironborn captain, a cup of bitter ale in hand. "You fought at the Redwind Coast?" Daemon asked. "Aye," Harlan said, "and at Deepwood Motte before the North took it back. The Greyjoys scatter like gulls now. Some bend the knee to the Boltons, others to no one. The sea's ours again, but there's little worth taking. What brings you so far inland?" The Ironborn's gaze grew distant. "A dream, maybe, or madness. The drowned god whispered of a storm coming, one not of men, but of death. We sail where the dead do not walk." Lyra frowned. "The dead?" Harlan shrugged. "I only know what I've seen. Frozen men in tattered black, walking where no fire burns. My men saw them near the stony shore." The hall fell silent. Daemon's hand tightened around his cup. He thought of the stranger they'd met on the road, the one who'd warned of a greater war. "If that's true," he said quietly, "then vengeance will mean nothing." "Aye," Harlan said, "but until the sea freezes solid, I'll keep my axe warm." When morning came, the Ironborn were gone. Their ships vanished into the mist as silently as they had come. Daemon stood on the shore, watching the tide drag their tracks away. Lyra joined him. "You believe what he said?" "I've seen too much not to," Daemon said. "The world's changing, Lyra. The War of Kings was only the beginning." She looked north, where the land rose into white peaks beneath a sky of pale fire. "Then we'd best reach White Harbor before the world ends." They set out again, the cold biting deeper. The days shortened, and the nights grew cruel. When they finally saw the harbor's distant lights, more than a fortnight had passed. White Harbor lay half frozen, its walls rimed with frost, its banners snapping in the sea wind. The merman of House Manderley gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Daemon's heart eased for the first time in months. But as they approached the gate, the guards leveled their spears. "Who goes there?" "Sir Daemon Rivers," he said. "And those who fight for the North." The captain of the gate eyed him warily. "Lord Manderley receives no strangers unbidden. The Freys have offered gold for your head, Riverwolf." Daemon's lips curved into a grim smile. "Then tell your lord he'll get gold aplenty if he listens." After a tense silence, the gates opened. They were led through snow-covered streets to the great hall of the new castle. Inside, warmth and light filled the vast chamber, and at its head sat Lord Wyman Manderley, a mountain of a man draped in furs, his eyes shrewd despite his age. "So," Manderley said, his voice deep as the sea, "the river wolf comes to White Harbor. Tell me, bastard of Riverrun, what brings you to my door?" Daemon stepped forward. "War, my lord. The Freys and Boltons spread their rot through the realm, and the north bleeds. I bring you men, ships, and the promise of vengeance. But more than that, I bring warning. The dead are moving." The hall fell silent. Lord Manderley's gaze lingered on Daemon, weighing his words like coin. At last he spoke. "Then perhaps it is time the North remembers indeed." He rose, slow but steady, and his voice carried through the hall. "You will have my ships, Sir Daemon. You will have my men. The Freys will answer for their crimes, and the Boltons with them. But if the dead come from beyond the wall—" His expression darkened. "Then even the living must learn to fight as one." Outside, the sea wind howled, rattling the shutters like the growl of a beast in its sleep. Daemon stood silent, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon him. The War of the Five Kings had ended in fire and betrayal. But this was something older. A storm was coming, greater than any crown, and it would not be stopped by swords alone. Winter held White Harbor in an iron grip. The streets lay buried beneath drifts of snow. The harbor's waters glazed with ice, and the wind off the sea bit through wool and mail alike. Daemon Rivers stood upon the ramparts of the new castle, his cloak drawn tight, watching as frozen mist curled over the masts of Manderley's ships. Below, the harbor bustled despite the cold. Sailors hauling salted fish, smiths hammering at weapons, children darting between stalls with red noses and bright eyes. Life clung stubbornly to the city, even as winter tightened its hold. Behind him, heavy footsteps echoed. Lord Wyman Manderley approached, his fur-lined cloak dragging in the snow. "You've caused a stir, Riverwolf," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Every man in the city whispers your name. Some say you've come to raise the North again. Others say you bring doom from the river. Perhaps both," Daemon said, eyes still on the sea. "You've seen the Frey's treachery firsthand. The Boltons rule from Winterfell, but their loyalty to the crown won't last the season. And beyond all that," he hesitated, "something worse moves in the dark. I've seen signs, my lord. The Ironborn spoke of the dead walking. They may have been mad, but the world's grown madder." Manderley grunted. "Aye, we've had strange tidings from the wall as well. Men gone missing, wildlings fleeing south in droves. Some say the dead hunt by moonlight. I'm too old for tales, but I've learned one thing. In the north, even tales bite." Daemon turned to face him. "Then we must prepare. Unite the houses, strike the Freys and Boltons before they turn their knives northward. The living must settle their debts before the dead arrive." Manderley's expression darkened. "I've sworn oaths, Riverwolf, to the crown that sits a boy king in the south. But oaths can rot like old ropes. You've given me reason enough to cut mine loose." He looked out over the harbor. "I'll ready the ships. The Freys feast upon the trident, fat and smug. They've forgotten the sea can reach them." Daemon bowed his head. "You'll have my sword." "Good," said Manderley, a gleam of cunning in his pale eyes. "Because the North remembers, and vengeance tastes sweeter when served cold." 3 days later, the harbor came alive with movement. Manderley's fleet, 36 ships, their hulls thick with frost, prepared to sail south under cover of snow. Daemon's men boarded alongside Manderley's banners, blue and white, the merman trident gleaming faintly in the pale sun. Lyra stood at Daemon's side on the deck of the Trident's bane, her cloak snapping in the wind. "You trust him?" she asked quietly. I trust his hunger, Daemon replied. It's a dangerous thing when an old man remembers he still has teeth. Lyra smiled faintly, though her gaze was troubled. And when the Freys fall, what then? Then we turn north, Daemon said, to Winterfell. The Boltons will not keep the wolf's den forever. The ships slipped from the harbor before dawn, their sails ghostly in the fog. The sea was cruel, gray waves heaving beneath skies the color of iron. Yet Daemon felt something stirring within him as the coast faded behind them, a fire that had slept too long. The north was not broken. Not yet. They sailed for days, keeping to the shallows to avoid Lannister patrols. The crew spoke little, save for quiet prayers to the drowned god or the Seven. At night, Daemon would stand at the prow, watching the stars burn cold above the dark waters. Sometimes he thought he could see faces in the waves, pale and fleeting, like memories. On the 5th night, Lyra joined him. You haven't slept, she said. Sleep brings dreams, he answered. And dreams bring ghosts, she murmured. He glanced at her. Do you dream of them too? Robb, Catelyn, your brother? She nodded. Sometimes I see them standing on the riverbank, waiting. They never speak, just watching, as though to see what we'll do with what's left of their world. Then we'll give them something worth watching, Daemon said. At sunrise, their fleet sighted Seaguard's broken towers in the distance. Smoke drifted from the hills, black against the snow. Scouts returned with word. Frey riders had occupied the outer villages, plundering what remained of the harvest. Daemon's jaw clenched. They grow bold, he said. Let's remind them what it costs. That night, the Riverwolf struck again. Manderly's men landed first, silent as the tide. Daemon led the vanguard, 100 swordsmen cloaked in gray. They fell upon the Frey camp at the river's mouth just before dawn. The enemy had grown complacent, their guards drunk, their horses half-starved. Daemon moved through the chaos like a shadow, his sword cutting arcs of silver in the dawn light. Lyra's arrows found their marks, each one deadly and precise. She had become a legend among the men, though she still flinched at her own name spoken in songs by the campfires. When the last Frey fell, Daemon stood among the dead, breathing hard. The river lapped at his boots, red where the blood met the current. Manderly rode up beside him, laughter booming from his chest. Well struck, Riverwolf. You've given them a taste of their own feast. Daemon looked southward, where the sun broke through the clouds. One feast isn't enough, he said. Walder Frey's still warm in his hall, counting his silver. We'll pay him a visit before the snows are through. Manderly's eyes gleamed. And when the twins burn, then the north will rise. They lingered only long enough to burn the Frey banners and bury their own. By the next dawn, word of their victory was spreading. The River Wolf had returned from the dead, the whispers said, and the north marched behind him. Men came from the woods and villages, old soldiers, hunters, even boys too young to shave, answering the call. In time, the camp outside Seaguard swelled to 500 strong. Daemon watched them train by torchlight, the snow falling soft and steady. They were not the armies of great lords, but they were enough. Lyra approached, wrapped in furs. The men speak of you as if you were king. Daemon shook his head. I'm no king. I'm just a man who remembers. Sometimes that's what kings should be, she said. He looked at her, the firelight catching the strands of her hair. And you, Lyra Snow? What do you fight for? She hesitated. Once it was my brother, then vengeance, now. She met his gaze. Now it's the North, and those who still have the courage to fight for it. Before he could answer, a horn sounded from the hills. A scout rode into camp, his face pale with cold and fear. "My lord," he shouted. "Bolton riders approach, 200 at least, bearing flayed men upon their spears." The camp erupted in motion. Daemon drew his sword, its steel gleaming in the firelight. "Then we hold the line," he said. "If the Boltons want the river, they'll drown in it first." Snow fell thicker now, swirling like ashes. Lyra took her place beside him, bow in hand. The men formed ranks along the frozen bank, shields ready. In the distance, the crimson banners of House Bolton emerged through the storm, grotesque shapes fluttering above black armor. Daemon raised his sword. "The North remembers!" he roared. The cry rose from hundreds of throats, fierce and unyielding. The first clash came like thunder. Steel met steel. Blood steamed against the snow, and the river ran red once more. Daemon fought at the center, his blade a blur, his rage cold as the winter itself. The Boltons pressed hard, but the North would not yield. When the last of them broke and fled, the field lay silent save for the moan of the wind. Daemon stood among the fallen, his cloak torn, his arm bleeding, but his eyes alive with fire. Lyra found him there. "You've won," she said softly. "For now," he replied. He looked toward the horizon, where the snow swallowed the world. "But winter's not done with us yet." And somewhere beyond that white veil, Daemon felt the weight of the coming storm, vast, ancient, and cold as death. The true war, he knew, was only just beginning. The dawn that followed the battle was gray and silent, as if the sky itself mourned the fallen. Snow drifted over the dead, covering Bolton and Northmen alike in a white shroud. Daemon Rivers stood amidst the corpses, his breath rising in pale clouds, his sword heavy in his hand. The cold bit deep, but he did not feel it. All around him, men worked in silence, gathering the wounded, building pyres, whispering prayers that went unheard. Lyra moved among them, her hands red with blood, binding wounds, closing eyes. She had ceased to tremble when she touched the dead. War had burned the fear out of her. When she came to Daemon's side, she said nothing for a long while. The wind howled between them, sharp and lonely. "They fought hard," she said at last. "They always do, when they've nothing left to lose," Daemon replied. He looked down at a fallen Bolton soldier. The man's armor was flayed skin over steel, his eyes staring skyward. Daemon kicked snow over the corpse. May the crows choke on him. By midday, smoke rose from the pyres. The smell of burning flesh hung thick in the air, mingling with the scent of pine and frost. Daemon stood apart, his cloak drawn close, watching the flames twist in the wind. Around him, the survivors moved like ghosts. 500 had stood with him before the battle. Barely 300 remained. Manderley's banner still flew by the riverbank, though the old lord himself was not there. He had returned to White Harbor to gather more ships and men. Daemon was alone now in command, though he had never sought it. The men called him Lord in their songs, though he was no true-born son of any house. It felt wrong upon his tongue, yet he did not correct them. The North needed a name to follow, and he would not let it fall silent. That night, a storm rolled in from the sea. The tents shuddered under the weight of snow, and the river groaned beneath its frozen skin. Daemon sat by the fire in his tent, sharpening his blade. Lyra entered without a word, shaking snow from her cloak. "More scouts returned," she said. "The Freys are marching north from the Twins, 2,000 men at least, led by Ryman Frey." Daemon's eyes narrowed. "Then they mean to crush what's left of us before the snows close the roads." Lyra nodded. They'll reach the river within a week." He sheathed his sword. "Good. Then we'll be waiting." Lyra frowned. "We can't stand against that many, Daemon. Even with the river frozen, we're too few." "Too few to fight fair," he said. "But fair fights are for fools. I learned that the day the Freys played their song." Outside, thunder rolled over the ice. Daemon rose and stepped into the storm, his cloak whipping behind him. The men looked up from their fires as he passed, their faces pale in the light of the flames. He climbed onto a boulder overlooking the camp, the wind cutting like knives through his hair. "Men of the North!" he shouted, his voice carried through the snow. "The Freys come to finish what they began. They think we'll kneel, that we'll beg for mercy from butchers who slay guests beneath their own roof." A murmur rose from the crowd, angry and low. "They think the North is broken," Daemon went on, "that we've forgotten the names of our dead. But the river remembers, and the North remembers, and I swear to you, before this winter ends, the twins will burn." The roar that followed was fierce and raw. It echoed through the trees and rolled down the frozen river like thunder. Lyra watched from below, her eyes shining in the firelight. She had seen men follow Daemon into madness before, but now she saw something different. Faith. When the storm passed, the camp moved with purpose. Daemon ordered traps laid along the frozen river, pits dug beneath the snow, and barrels of oil hidden among the reeds. If the Freys meant to march across the ice, they would find it treacherous ground. For days, the Northmen labored without rest. Lyra moved among them, her presence a quiet comfort. The men spoke of her with reverence, calling her the Wolf's Shadow, for she was always beside their leader, silent and watchful. On the 5th night, the scouts returned with word. The Frey host had reached the southern bank. Daemon climbed a ridge and saw their fires stretching for miles, 1,000 bright scars upon the dark horizon. The sight set his teeth on edge. "They outnumber us 5-1, Lyra murmured. "Then we'll give each man 5 deaths to remember," Daemon said. The next day dawned bitter and still. The river lay silent, a mirror of ice beneath a sky of pale gray. Daemon took his place among the men at the river's edge, his sword drawn, his breath steaming in the cold. Across the frozen expanse, he could see the Freys forming ranks. Their banners rose like carrion birds, the twin towers on pale blue, mocking the sky. A horn sounded. The Freys advanced. They came in tight formation, shields raised, spears leveled. Daemon waited until the first ranks were halfway across the river. Then he lifted his sword. "Now!" From the banks, the Northmen loosed flaming arrows. The shafts arced through the air, falling like rain upon the ice. The oil hidden beneath the snow caught fire, and the river blazed. The sound was deafening, a cracking, roaring, as the frozen surface shattered beneath the heat. Men screamed as they plunged into the icy water. Horses reared and fell, their riders dragged down. The Frey formation broke in chaos, panic spreading faster than flame. Daemon's men surged forward, striking from the banks and the woods. Lyra fought beside him, her bow singing, her arrows finding throats and eyes. She moved with the calm of one who had long since made peace with death. Daemon's blade rose and fell, carving a path through the firelit snow. By dusk, it was done. The river was black with corpses, the ice stained red. The Freys who survived fled south, their banners trampled in the mud. When the fires burned low, Daemon stood upon the riverbank, watching the bodies drift beneath the cracked ice. His men gathered around him, weary but exultant. "It's begun," Lyra said softly beside him. "The Freys will never forgive this." "Good," Daemon said. "Then they'll remember it." The Northmen cheered. their voices rising into the cold night. But Daemon did not smile. He felt no victory in his heart, only the weight of what must come next. That night, in the quiet of his tent, Lyra found him staring into the flame of a single candle. "They'll name you a hero for this," she said. He shook his head. "Heroes die clean. I'll die wet and cold, with blood on my hands." "Then at least die for something that matters," she said. Daemon looked up, and in her eyes, he saw not pity, but understanding. "For the North," he said. "For the North," she echoed. Outside, the river crackled under the moonlight, the sound like bones breaking beneath the weight of winter. And in the distance, unseen beyond the horizon, darker things moved in the snow, shadows without warmth, rising from forgotten graves. The War of the Five Kings was over, but a greater war crept ever closer, silent and cold as the grave. The river froze again before dawn, sealing the dead beneath its glassy skin. When the sun rose, weak and pale, it gleamed red across the ice, as though the trident itself bled in mourning. Daemon Rivers stood upon the bank, cloak whipping in the bitter wind. The smoke from the pyres drifted eastward, thin and gray, until it vanished into the morning haze. Around him, the camp was silent. The men spoke little after the battle, their victory soured by what they had seen. The Frey host had been broken, but not cleanly. Too many of Daemon's own lay among them, faces white as snow, frozen hands still clutching swords. Lyra moved among the wounded, her cloak dark with soot. She worked with quiet purpose, though her eyes betrayed her weariness. She had seen more blood in the last fortnight than most healers saw in a lifetime. When she joined Daemon, her hands were red to the wrists. "They'll come again," she said, her voice low. "The Freys have more sons than they have sense." Daemon nodded. "And we'll greet every one of them the same." Lyra looked at him, studying the lines carved deep into his face. "How long can this go on? Every victory costs more than it gives. You bleed them, yes, but you're bleeding us too." He said nothing. The truth of her words hung heavy between them. When the wind shifted, it carried the faint, distant sound of wolves howling. Lyra turned her head toward the sound, her breath catching. "Do you hear it?" "I do," Daemon said quietly. "The North remembers." That night, the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the river. Daemon gathered his captains around the fire, rough men, scarred and grim, the faces of survivors. "We can't hold the river forever," said Hal Manderley, his beard white with frost. "The Freys will send for the Lannisters, or worse. We've bloodied them, but we've stirred the lion's den." "Let them come," Daemon said. "Every man they send north is one less to guard their gold in the south." Hal frowned. "You fight like a man who means to die, River Wolf. But the North needs living leaders." Daemon looked into the fire. "The North needs vengeance more." A silence followed. Then Lyra spoke. "We've avenged the Red Wedding. You've done what no lord dared to do. But there's something darker stirring now. We've heard tales. Ravens from the wall that never returned. Wildlings fleeing south with stories of white shadows in the woods." One of the captains spat into the snow. "Ghost stories." Lyra shook her head. "Stories don't freeze the blood in a man's veins. Something's coming. The Ironborn warned of it before they vanished into the mist." Daemon looked at her sharply. "You believe them?" "I believe what I've seen," she said. "The storms are growing stronger, the nights colder. The land itself feels wrong. This isn't just war, it's the end of something." Her words hung in the air like frost. Daemon rose without a word and stepped out into the cold. The firelight spilled after him, casting his shadow long across the snow. He stood by the river for a long while, staring at the frozen water. Beneath the ice, he thought he saw movement, dark shapes twisting below the surface. But when he blinked, they were gone. He drew his sword and drove it point first into the ice. The sound rang through the night, sharp and final. "Then we'll meet the end as Northmen do," he said softly. Lyra joined him. "And when the end comes, then we fight until there's no one left to remember why." 2 nights later, the first ravens arrived from White Harbor. Their claws scratched against the tent pole as the messenger unrolled his parchment. Daemon read the words by the light of a flickering candle. "Lord Wyman calls the banners. Winterfell must fall. The Boltons grow fat in their stolen hall. The North rises again." Daemon crushed the parchment in his fist. "It's begun." He looked to Lyra. "Gather the men. We march at dawn." The news spread through the camp like fire. Men who had slept with despair in their hearts now rose with purpose. For the first time in years, there was something beyond vengeance, something worth fighting for. When the sun broke over the horizon, the army of the River Wolf turned north. The sound of drums echoed faintly through the frozen woods. The march to Winterfell was a trial of ice and will. Snow blinded their path, and the cold stole breath and sleep alike. Yet they pressed on. Villages long abandoned offered shelter from the wind. In others they found survivors, thin, hungry folk who stared in disbelief at the banners of House Tully, stitched anew from scraps of crimson and silver. "Is it true?" one old man asked as Daemon passed. "The Freys are dead?" "Not yet," Daemon said, "but soon." When at last they reached the Wolfswood, the snow fell thicker still. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with white. Daemon's army moved through them as ghosts might, silent but for the crunch of boots upon the frozen ground. At night, they built no fires. The men whispered of strange sounds, cries carried on the wind, shapes moving beyond the tree line. Lyra did not sleep, her hand never far from her bow. One evening, a scout returned pale-faced, his lips trembling. "We found a village," he said. "Empty, not burned, just gone. The doors were open, the food still warm, snow on the beds but no bodies." Daemon's face hardened. "Wildlings?" "No," the scout whispered. "Something worse." That night, Daemon dreamed. He stood upon a frozen field, the moon white above him. From the north came a sound, soft at first, then growing louder, the creak of ice, the whisper of death. And then he saw them, pale figures walking through the snow, their eyes blue as winter stars. He woke with his sword in his hand, and the sound of the wind screaming outside the tent. Lyra was already awake, her bow drawn. "What is it?" she hissed. He listened. Beyond the canvas, he heard the faint, rhythmic thud of footsteps, not human, not steady. Then came the cry of a watchman, a sound cut short by something colder than steel. Daemon tore open the tent flap and stepped into the night. The camp was chaos. Fires sputtered in the wind, men shouting, running, dying. Shapes moved through the snow, tall, thin, gliding. Where they passed, the torches guttered out. Lyra loosed an arrow. It shattered in midair, frozen before it struck. One of the pale things turned its gaze upon her, and Daemon saw his breath freeze in his throat. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing her arm. "To the trees!" They fled through the camp as men fell screaming behind them. Daemon could feel the cold like a blade on his back. He turned once, just long enough to see one of the creatures raise a hand. Frost bloomed along the ground, creeping toward him like living death. He slashed at it with his sword, and to his shock, the steel glowed faintly blue where it met the cold. The thing recoiled, hissing, and the ice cracked beneath its feet. "Go!" Daemon roared. They reached the woods and did not stop until the screams faded. The snow fell silently now, muffling all sound. Daemon leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, his sword still glowing faintly in the moonlight. Lyra stared at it, wide-eyed. What was that? He looked north, toward the unseen lands beyond the wall. "The end," he said. But even as he spoke, he felt the river's pulse within him, the same cold fire that had carried him this far. He tightened his grip on his sword. "Then we'll face it," he said, "as wolves do." Lyra nodded, her breath trembling in the air. Together. And beneath the frozen stars, two figures stood against the darkness, the river wolf and the woman who shadowed him, alone, defiant, and unbroken. As winter closed its hand around the world, the woods had turned against them. Snow fell thicker than ever, swallowing their tracks as soon as they were made, and the wind howled through the trees like the cries of the damned. Daemon Rivers led what remained of his host, no more than 50 men now, weary and half-starved, through the pale wilderness north of the Trident. The dead had come upon them like a nightmare made flesh, and the world that followed was one of endless frost and silence. No ravens flew overhead, no wolves howled. The forest was empty, save for the whisper of the wind through the boughs and the crunch of boots on snow. Daemon walked at the head of the column, his sword drawn, its faint blue sheen fading as though the light itself had tired of the fight. Behind him, Lyra moved with quiet grace despite her exhaustion. Her eyes were red from the cold, but they held the same iron spark that had carried her this far. Around her, the last of Daemon's men stumbled onward, their armor rimed with frost, their faces hollow and pale. When they came upon the ruins of an old tower, little more than a broken crown of stone half buried in snow, Daemon called a halt. "We make camp here," he said, voice hoarse from the cold. "There's shelter from the wind, and we'll need it." The men obeyed without question. They dug a pit for a fire and ringed it with stones, though the flames they coaxed to life were feeble things, fighting against the weight of winter. Daemon stood apart, staring northward through the falling snow. Somewhere beyond that endless white lay Winterfell, and beyond Winterfell, the wall itself, ancient, cold, and silent. Lyra joined him, her cloak drawn close. "You're thinking of the wall." "I'm thinking of what's beyond it," Daemon said quietly. "The Ironborn were right, the dead walk. I've seen them now with my own eyes." She shivered. "If they come this far south, no army will stand against them." "No army," he agreed. "But maybe something else." He looked down at his sword, the faint shimmer still clinging to its edge. "When I struck at the creature, the steel burned blue. Old steel shouldn't do that. There's power in it, something older than the Freys or Boltons, older than kings and crowns." Lyra touched his arm. "Whatever it is, it's kept you alive. For now," he said, and turned away. That night, the men huddled close around the fire. They spoke little, and when they did, their words were hollow. One told of a village he'd left behind on the Red Fork, where the snow had buried even the church bell. Another whispered of dreams filled with blue eyes and the sound of cracking ice. Daemon listened in silence, his thoughts far away. Lyra sat beside him, mending her bowstring by the firelight. "You'll lead them to Winterfell," she said. "You have to." "They'll die before we reach it," Daemon said. "The Freys will regroup, the Boltons will hunt us, and the dead." He trailed off. "I've led too many to graves already." She looked at him, her expression fierce. And yet they still follow you, because you don't bow, because you remember. Daemon met her gaze, and for a moment, he saw warmth there, something almost forgotten. "Do you?" he asked. "I remember everything," she said softly. Before he could reply, a horn sounded in the distance, low, mournful, and wrong. The men froze. Daemon rose to his feet, hand on his sword. "Not ours," Hal Manderley muttered. "The dead have no need for horns." "No," Daemon said, "but the living do." He climbed the broken steps of the tower and peered into the white darkness. Through the snow, faint lights flickered, torches moving slow and steady, a column of riders, armored, flying banners Daemon could not yet see. "Freys!" Lyra called from below. "No," Daemon said. His eyes narrowed. "Worse." As the riders drew closer, the banners became clear, pink and red, the flayed man of House Bolton writhing in the wind. Daemon descended the tower. "They've found us." The men scrambled for their weapons, forming a rough line before the ruined tower. Daemon took his place at the center, Lyra beside him, her bow drawn. The snow thickened until the world seemed made of ghosts. Then came the sound of hooves. The Bolton riders emerged from the storm, cruel smiles beneath their steel helms. Their leader rode forward, a tall man clad in black and crimson. "Sir Daemon Rivers," he called, his voice carrying through the snow. "The River Wolf himself. Lord Bolton sends his regards and his mercy. Lay down your arms, and you'll die quick." Daemon's reply was a single word. "No." The man sneered. "So be it." The battle was chaos. The Boltons charged, their lances lowered, but the snow swallowed their speed. Arrows hissed from Lyra's bow, striking true. Daemon met the first rider with a swing that split man and horse alike. The blue light flared again along his blade, brighter now, cutting through the white like a shard of dawn. Steel rang on steel. Blood steamed against the snow. The Bolton line faltered as men fell screaming into the drifts. Daemon fought like a man possessed, his strength born of fury and memory. Around him, his men held the line, grim and unyielding. Lyra's arrows ran out. She drew a sword from a fallen foe and joined the fight beside Daemon. Together, they moved as one, blades flashing, backs to one another. When at last the last Bolton fell, the snow was red for 100 paces. Daemon stood gasping, his sword dripping blood and blue fire alike. But even as the silence settled, the cold deepened, the wind died. The men looked around uneasily, their breath hanging in the air. Then they saw it. Shapes on the ridge, pale, motionless, watching, the dead. They moved slowly, with a sound like cracking ice. Their eyes burned with cold fire, their skin white as snow. The sight stole the breath from Daemon's lungs. Lyra's voice trembled. "We can't fight them." "We can run," he said, though even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. The first of the creatures stepped onto the field. Daemon raised his sword. "Northmen," he cried, "we've fought lions and traitors, fire and famine. We've buried kings and kin alike. If this is our last stand, then let the gods remember we did not kneel." The men roared, a sound fierce enough to wake the dead. And perhaps it did, for the creatures came then in a rush of frost and shadow. The clash was like no battle Daemon had ever known. Blades shattered on contact with the cold. Men screamed as frost consumed them. Yet Daemon's sword burned brighter with each stroke, its blue fire cutting through death itself. Lyra fought beside him until her arm bled, until her breath came in gasps of pain. One by one, the Northmen fell. The dead pressed closer. Daemon could feel his strength fading. Then he heard Lyra cry out. He turned and saw her fall, her blade shattering as one of the creatures drove her to the ground. "No!" He lunged, his sword cleaving through the white. The creature burst apart in shards of ice. He dropped to his knees beside her. Her eyes fluttered open. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Not yet." Damon pressed her hand to his chest. "You'll live," she smiled faintly. "Then who will remind you what you fight for?" Her hand went still. Damon rose. The blue fire in his sword flared until it blazed white. He turned toward the advancing dead, his voice breaking through the storm. "For her," he said. "For the North." And he charged. The snow swallowed him, the fire of his blade vanishing into the white. When the dawn came, the field was empty save for the wind. But on that frozen riverbank, the ice glowed faintly blue beneath the morning sun, as if the river itself still remembered his name. When the storm broke, dawn was pale and cold, and the land lay buried beneath a silence so deep it seemed the world itself had died. The river was gone, sealed beneath a sheet of ice thick as iron, and the ruins of the battle lay scattered across its frozen surface. Shards of steel, broken spears, the bones of men and beasts alike. The air smelled of frost and ash. Out of that wasteland came a single rider. His horse was gaunt and wild-eyed, its breath steaming in the dawn light. Upon its back sat a man cloaked in torn gray, his hair white with frost, his face hollow as stone. In his hand, he carried a sword that still glimmered faintly blue, though the light within it flickered like a dying flame. Sir Damon Rivers rode north. Behind him, the river stretched to the horizon, a graveyard of ice. He did not look back. His thoughts were a haze of pain and silence. He remembered the battle only in fragments, the sound of Lyra's cry, the feel of her hand going cold in his, the last flash of her eyes before the snow claimed her. After that, there was nothing but the storm, the cold, and the endless white. He did not know how long he rode. Time had lost meaning. Day and night blurred into one gray eternity. Once he thought he saw the shapes of men walking beside him, Northmen in tattered armor, their eyes dim, their faces familiar. Robb Stark, Catelyn Tully, Lyra Snow. They said nothing, only watched as he rode past, and when he turned to look again, they were gone. The road climbed higher, the trees giving way to barren hills. The wind grew sharper, filled with the cries of unseen things. Yet Damon pressed on, following the faint trail that led toward the shadow of Winterfell's towers rising on the far horizon. The fortress looked smaller than he remembered, its stones dark against the snow. Smoke rose faintly from its chimneys, thin and wavering. When he reached the outer walls, he found them unguarded. The great gate stood open, and the courtyard within was silent, save for the whisper of wind through broken timbers. The banners that hung above the gate bore no sigil, only rags of red and gray faded by frost. Damon dismounted, his limbs heavy. He walked through the yard where once kings had stood, where wolves had howled and snow had fallen upon laughter. Now there was nothing but ruin. The great hall's doors hung from their hinges, the tables overturned, the hearth cold. He crossed the hall and climbed the stair that led to the battlements. From there, he could see the north stretching in all directions, white and endless. In the far distance, the wall rose like a scar across the world, black against the sky, and beyond it, he thought he saw movement, a dark mass shifting like smoke. The wind changed, and with it came a sound faint but clear, the echo of horns long and low, answered by the far-off cry of wolves. Damon gripped the hilt of his sword. The blue flame flickered once more, stronger this time, as if it too had heard the call. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not while I breathe." He descended the steps and made for the stables. Most were empty, save for one old gray horse chewing listlessly on straw. Daemon saddled it with stiff fingers, his movements slow but sure. He tied Lyra's dagger to his belt beside his sword. Before he rode out, he turned to look back at the hall one last time. The snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady, covering the ruin like a shroud. "For you," he whispered to the memory of her voice. "For the north." Then he spurred his horse northward, toward the wall. The journey took him through the heart of the frozen wild. He passed villages long dead, their doors swinging open to the wind. He saw frozen rivers where the bodies of men and horses lay locked beneath the ice, faces twisted in their last moments. Once, he came upon a tree with strange marks carved into its bark, circles and lines, symbols older than men. Beneath it, the snow was stained blue. At night, he dreamed. In his dreams, the river flowed again, and Lyra stood upon its bank, her hair red as the dawn. She reached out her hand, but when he took it, she turned to frost and blew away upon the wind. Each time he woke, his sword burned faintly at his side, as if sharing his grief. The closer he came to the wall, the colder the air grew. The sun no longer rose. The sky remained a pale gray twilight that never ended. The world felt suspended, waiting. When at last he reached Castle Black, he found its gates half buried in snow. The Black brothers who remained were few, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. They met him with raised spears, wary and silent. "I seek the Lord Commander," Daemon said. One of the men stepped forward, a young man with dark hair streaked with gray, his eyes cold but steady. "He's gone," the man said. Jon Snow rode beyond the wall and did not return. Daemon's breath caught. Then the stories are true. The man's jaw tightened. All of them. The dead walk, and the wall no longer keeps them out. He studied Daemon's sword. "That blade. It's like the commander's. Where did you find it?" "In the river," Daemon said. "Or perhaps it found me." The man nodded grimly. "Then the gods have sent you. We're all that's left. If you'll fight, you're one of us." Daemon looked north, where the horizon glowed faintly blue. The sound of horns came again, closer this time. "Then let's finish what they started." That night, he stood upon the wall, the world spread out below him. The wind tore at his cloak, biting through to his bones. Below, torches flickered along the battlements where the last of the night's watch gathered. No more than 50 men, black shadows against the snow. The glow on the horizon had grown brighter. It was not fire. It was the color of death. Daemon drew his sword. The blue light answered, flaring bright enough to cast shadows upon the ice. "Lyra," he whispered, "if you can hear me, keep the river flowing." He turned to the men beside him. "They'll come at dawn. When they do, hold the line. The North remembers." And when dawn came, it was not sunlight that broke the sky, but a pale radiance that bled across the clouds. From the woods below rose the dead, thousands of them, silent as snow, their eyes burning cold. Daemon lifted his sword high. The light from it shone like a star. "For the living," he said. The dead came on. Steel met ice, and the wall shook with the force of it. Daemon fought at the front, his blade blazing, cutting through the darkness like the first fire of creation. Around him, men fell, rose, and fell again. The sky itself seemed to split, filled with the cries of crows and the roar of the wind. He did not tire. He did not fear. He was the river now, cold, relentless, and unending. When the light of his sword finally dimmed, the dead began to falter. Dawn broke truly at last, pale and weak but real, spilling over the wall and into the frozen land beyond. And there, upon the battlements, the river wolf stood motionless, his sword buried in the ice, his eyes turned toward the north. The wind carried his name across the snow, whispering it through the trees, across the rivers, to every corner of the realm. Daemon Rivers, the bastard knight who would not yield. And though winter still ruled the world, for a moment, the north remembered, and the river ran red once more.